Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this meeting of the Housing, Planning and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I remind members that it's helpful if you could turn off both cameras and microphones unless you are speaking. And it's also extremely helpful to me if you have questions, if we could use the chat box facility, so that I don't miss anyone with an eagerness to ask a question. I also remind you that the contents of the chat box are a public document, and therefore inappropriate comments are not particularly wise in the circumstances. Item 1 on the agenda, I've got apologies from Councillor Cropper, Billington and Robinson. I understand that Councillor Dutton is here as a substitute. Item 2, there is no urgent business being brought to my attention. So we go to item 3, declarations of interest. You've had the standard form, and if there is anything appropriate on that, could you please declare it? Not recorded again in the chat box, it will be picked up and recorded accordingly. Item 4, minutes of the meeting on the 14th of January. These have been circulated. I take it members are in agreement to those, unless someone dissents. Could someone please move approval? Thank you, Councillor Gibson.
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I take it therefore those bits are approved.
Agreed.
Thank you. We come somewhat earlier than my agenda says, but I'm pleased to say that we now welcome the Mayor of Greater Manchester to the meeting for his half-yearly update, and we do have some additional time put you on the spot, Mayor. So could I please hand over to you? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all, and good to see such a strong attendance tonight. I thought, Chair, what I would do is just talk about how I see 2021 unfolding from here, how the continuing response to the pandemic will begin to become more focused on recovery, and how we lay the foundations for a strong recovery in Greater Manchester, and touch particularly on issues of most relevance to this committee, the emergency housing response and the work we've done on homelessness and rough sleeping, and how that might develop going forward. But of course, how we then bring through a planning framework for Greater Manchester with the events of last year and the changes that are necessary there, but also supporting that then with transport developments and clean air, and also efforts to create a greener Greater Manchester. So I thought I would approach things in that way, if the committee is happy with that. Just then to start with the sort of here and now, just to provide an update for the committee on vaccination. As you've probably seen in the media, it's going as well as we could have hoped. Obviously there are the usual glitches, as you would expect in a programme of this size, which has been developed so quickly, but we are on target in Greater Manchester to hit the government's mid-February target of vaccinating the top 4 priority groups. So as of yesterday, 440 first doses delivered, slightly more actually, and if everybody in the top 4 groups was to be vaccinated, it would be somewhere around the 560,000 mark. So, you know, given that we are currently at a run rate of about 100,000 vaccines a week, you know, I think you can see we're comfortably within, I say comfortably, we are within reach of the target, and I think we should do so without any great difficulty. We are then being asked. We're going to feed in, whether we're asked or not, to the government our thoughts about how we prepare then for what comes after national lockdown. Because again, I think this is about laying the right foundations for the recovery from this. There is, I think, unanimity across the 10 districts, the 10 leaders and myself, that we don't want to see a return to the tiers that we had last year, and the stop-start approach for businesses, which I think they found very difficult, and of course the confusion for residents. The emerging feeling is we need to see an unlocking that is national and phased and more planned than what we had before, and obviously that can be done in a more methodical way, given that the vaccination programme will be continuing alongside it, giving greater degree of confidence, I think, that whatever arrangements are made will be sustainable, given the growing impact of the of vaccination as the year progresses. So that's where our thinking has got to. Just to say something, if I might, Chair, about test and trace. You'll remember this was a subject of great focus last year, and Greater Manchester stood up a GM contact tracing hub shortly after the government created its own national test and trace system. Throughout the second half of 2020, the hub was working with the national team to iron out glitches and problems with the data and the way the national system interacted with the GM hub and then with the districts. We set up a pilot involving Greater Manchester Fire and Greater Manchester Police, which actually unlocked a lot of the problems, to the point where there is now a much higher contact rate for what are called index cases. So people who are a primary case can't be contacted by the national system, and within 24 hours then they are passed now to the GM level, and we have increased the contact rate of those index cases closer to 90% from about 75% where it was in around October last year. So we believe that the test and trace system is operating at a higher level now, and that will be necessary alongside the vaccination programme. Vaccination on its own does not solve everything. Test and trace now needs to kind of click into gear again to manage us out of the pandemic. So we think good progress has been made on that. And the reason these things are relevant to the committee is obviously it then determines how quickly we can develop our thinking on reopening the economy, developing our plans for reform of public transport, and of course progressing with the development of we hope a green recovery in Greater Manchester, supported by our kind of wider environmental plan, the Clean Air Plan, and the plan of the 9 districts that will replace the spatial framework. And I can update the committee, you probably know this already, but there will be an AGMA meeting a week tomorrow, 12th of February, to consider the new process for the plan of the 9 districts, to carry forward a planning framework coming out of the decision of Stockport last year. So that's where we are, and it's really important, obviously, to try and kind of time these things properly. So moving into some of the more specifics, we obviously have been running an emergency response on housing, particularly on homelessness, throughout last year and into this year, and that will be necessary, particularly I think throughout 2021, given that the economic crisis potentially hasn't been, well, I say potentially, I think I'm pretty certain in saying hasn't yet been fully felt. My sense is that the damage to the Greater Manchester economy is more profound perhaps than we realise. Furlough may be masking some of the scale of the redundancy problems that we might face. The potential of our businesses to survive will be linked to any roadmap to release from the restrictions. So I think we've got a very big challenge ahead of us, a very big challenge indeed. And obviously we need to help people through severe economic pressure, because that's what some people will be facing. There is the ongoing issue of people unable to access the government's public support. So it's estimated that that is 3 million people nationally. Certainly, we believe it is a couple of 100,000 at least in Greater Manchester, and that too creates real pressure on local services and local support. So on homelessness, we've got a very kind of close watch on what is happening out there, and obviously this is a matter very relevant to this committee. A bed every night was a scheme that I developed, as colleagues will know, with the support of the districts, and it had been slowly kind of building over the last few years. The general feeling is, and this is shared, I think, amongst the wider Greater Manchester Homelessness Action Network, that it was really important that we'd done the work that we had done over the 2 or 3 years preceding the pandemic, because it put us in a much better place to face what has come at us in the last year. I think a bed every night has moved beyond the phase when we were trying to get buy-in for it and proof of the concept of it. I think it's now broadly accepted. It's an essential part of the support infrastructure that we need across Greater Manchester. So tonight there will be 520 people in a bed every night. I know districts are supporting people in their own ways as well. There are people still in the residual everyone in accommodation. The reason I mention that is it's quite a parlous situation and quite a difficult situation to sustain, because obviously there's big numbers of people. If you combine the numbers in emergency accommodation, temporary accommodation, this is a challenging situation ongoing. But nevertheless, the government keeps a strong focus on it, and we're grateful for that. Alongside the emergency response, I have been encouraging my team at the Combined Authority to keep progressing the Housing First pilot, and we're in the second year of our Housing First pilot, second of 3 years. We currently have 191 people accommodated in a permanent home, and here's the little bit that makes us proud: 0 evictions. There has been a very high rate of sustaining tenancies, 90% rate tenancy sustainability rate. Housing First has worked in Greater Manchester, no doubt about it. We hope to hit 240 people accommodated by the end of this current financial year, and we're confident we will hit our targets for the 3 years. And what we will need is cross-party support to recognise what's been achieved, but then say to the government that the pilot needs to become permanent as we build out from the pandemic. Just to mention a couple of other positive developments in this regard, we have been allocated some funding under the Rough Sleeper Accommodation Programme. It was called the Next Steps Programme, but this is to create move-on accommodation for people in a bed every night or in other forms of emergency accommodation. We're aiming to deliver 500 homes for people who were rough sleeping previously by the end of June 2021. You may have seen in the news the Castlefield scheme, which is similar but additional to that programme, which is being developed by a number of partners with Manchester City Council, Capital and Centric, Peel, but also the charity that runs the Embassy Bus programme. So some really positive things happening, Chair. The Ethical Lettings Agency, which was established by our housing providers, that runs under the name Let Us, which is obviously about taking properties from private landlords and then putting them out onto the market on social rent terms. They currently have 200 properties available to homeless households, which again is a real significant step change in our response. I'll just say finally on this topic, Chair, that we believe we need to move beyond the phase that we're in into a more preventative phase, looking at all of the causes of homelessness and putting together a stronger strategy to prevent homelessness across the city region. So we're currently bringing forward a draft document, the Greater Manchester Homelessness Prevention Strategy, which will go out shortly. It will go to the homelessness programme board in the next couple of weeks, and will then go out more broadly for consultation across the districts before going to public consultation. And obviously we would encourage colleagues to play a part in that. We've already, though, initiated a young person's prevention pathfinder, which began in January, which will support 250 young people this year who are at risk of homelessness, and hopefully prevent that happening. So that's a run through developments on homelessness. I think you can see, Chair, there's a lot of positive developments there. If I may, I'll just turn briefly to wider plans around recovery. I mean, I believe quite strongly that the recovery from COVID-19, not just in Greater Manchester or even indeed in the UK, but internationally, will be a green recovery. It stands to reason to me that when we're all having to rethink the economy and get into the business of creating thousands of good quality new jobs, which is what we are going to have to do given the scale of change that we've seen in the economy, that the obvious place to look for those jobs is the green economy. And we have an opportunity as we look towards the COP in Glasgow in November this year to put Greater Manchester under the spotlight, hopefully in a very favourable way, at that meeting. This will be one of the first times that the world has come together to restart things, if you like, following the pandemic. And we believe that this is a great opportunity for us to showcase our thinking. So colleagues will know we have the plan around 2038 and carbon neutrality by 2038. I have been working with Electricity Northwest and Cadent to deliver a plan for the decarbonisation of energy in Greater Manchester, consistent with that date. And we are hopeful that we will get Ofgem and government support for that plan, because it will need regulatory backing if we are to get there. But we also then have our ambitions for retrofitting of properties, both homes and business properties. And that is where I think we could begin to create the thousands of jobs that Greater Manchester will need to make this a successful green recovery from COVID. And hopefully the COP is an opportunity to kickstart that. You know, in a time where we've been asking people to stay at home, I think the truth of the fact that a lot of people have homes that don't support good health and are expensive and not easy for people to sustain has become more and more true. And a proper response to the pandemic, which is consistent with the aim of levelling up, is to improve housing in some of our poorest communities first, and to make those homes not just zero carbon but cheaper to run, and better supporting people's health. So that's certainly an aim that I have coming out of this, alongside the development of the plans for the clean air zone and supporting transport providers with funding to be able to make the transition to cleaner vehicles. And I'll just touch on this last point before I hand back to you, Chair, and developing our public transport ambitions consistent with a planning framework for recovery. So you will have noticed that the Greater Manchester Combined Authority recently endorsed the 5-year delivery plan, which is part of TfGM's Transport 2040. And this is all about laying the foundations for what we call our network, the London-style integrated public transport system. I think, you know, in everything the committee looks at, housing, planning, and the environment, an integrated, affordable, reliable, accessible public transport system seems to me to be absolutely at the heart of all of those objectives. So we passed that plan, the 5-year delivery plan, and it obviously brings benefits for all parts of GM. It continues the massive investment in cycling and walking, which I hope members of the committee can see coming through on a regular basis now through the Mayor's Challenge Fund, through the work that Chris Boardman and his team have done. But I also just want to touch on some recent proposals we put through under the Transforming Cities Fund Tranche 2, which was just shy of £70 million of funding, which is devolved transport funding. All of the things that we're doing are meant to be enabling for that, our network vision, that London-style transport system. So there was 20 million within it to develop quality bus transit schemes, particularly orbital routes, because in a reformed bus system, we want to see more orbital links connecting people to the tram network and also to cycling and walking infrastructure. There was £15 million for a new rail station at Golborne, which came out as the best performing new rail station option in the new station study carried out by TfGM. Colleagues will have seen that we took control of Horwich Parkway station this week, consistent with our ambitions to take control of rail stations in Greater Manchester. There was a contribution to the Network Rail Greek Street project in Stockport. Councillor Walker will be interested to hear that there was a £2 million investment for a new travel hub in Tilsley, recognising the success of the Lee guided busway and the greater demand for parking to use the busway. £10 million in match funding to support the quicker rollout of electric vehicle charging points across all 10 local authorities, and funding for accessibility improvements to Swinton rail station. So, it's not all talk, if you know what I mean. We are putting through now funding to deliver specifics to build out the London-style public transport system that I believe Greater Manchester desperately needs. You'll know that we've just finished consulting for the second time on plans to reform buses, recognising that COVID has changed things, but we wanted an opportunity for the public and operators to put in their further views on the reform of buses. That consultation is complete. The replies are now being considered, but at some point we will be wanting to move ahead with a decision on the reform of buses in Greater Manchester to support our vision. There's a lot there, Chair. I apologise for racing through a huge amount of information, but I trust it's of interest to the committee, and I will hand back to you for any comments or questions that you or members of the committee may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for that whistle-stop tour of an important period in development of the conurbation. So thank you for that. Whilst I'm looking for members' questions, if you could, through the chat box, please, colleagues, just indicate a wish to speak, and then I can make sure I don't miss anyone. But can I just pick up on the town centres and towns generally? Clearly, events the last 2 or 3 weeks have exacerbated some of the situations in most of our town centres, with the Debenhams and other major high street retailers closure imminent, and that's clearly going to have an impact on town centres. How do you propose to revisit the town centres fund to look at supporting those town centres that will suffer, that previously may not have been on a list of concerns, but not so dramatically as something post Arcadia, Debenhams and Topshop the like?
Well, you're absolutely right, Chair, to ask about that, because I think the challenge for town centres has become even greater, hasn't it? On the one hand, you could say that maybe people will work more locally, more work from home, and maybe there will be more support for local shops going forward, but maybe that's a little bit of wishful thinking. I think you're absolutely right to say the principal towns of Greater Manchester will face a difficult 5 years after the pandemic, and as you say, some big retailers. I can't remember the exact number of Debenhams shops in Greater Manchester, but it was significant, wasn't it? It was about 4 or 5, I think. Yeah, so you're right. It puts a new urgency on the town centre work. I mean, I will come back to the Stockport example of the Mayoral Development Corporation as being a potential response. So we had a town centre challenge, you might remember, and we've supported the development of some master planning for the towns that were nominated by districts as part of that. But I think it's fair to say that the most meaningful response to the Town Centre Challenge has been what has been happening in Stockport, where obviously the council has taken a look at the town centre west area adjacent to the railway arches and come up with a considerable redevelopment supported by the rebuilding of Stockport interchange. TFGM have been rebuilding the principal transport interchanges in most of our boroughs over recent years, and Stockport is going to get funding as part of that. But I would say in this case it's more integrated into building a new community in that area as well, with also cycling and walking infrastructure going in. So the answer to your question, Chair, is I think we need to be more ambitious for our towns as high quality residential centres. I think the Stockport example tells us that there is a demand, there is interest from the property sector. I don't think they've struggled, if you like, to get the level of investor interest. And I also though look north to Rochdale and see changes there that are beginning to kickstart the town centre regeneration. So my answer would be to all districts that the model, the MDC model or something similar, is available, because I think it requires a new master planning of our towns rather than just replacing one retail offer that goes. I think it needs something more substantial than that.
Thank you very much. That's stimulated a number of questions, so I'm going to take them in order, please. Councillor Shilton Godwin, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got 3 questions, and thanks very much for all of that, Andy. And I'm sorry it's me again because I saw you on Tuesday.
That was good to see you again.
3 quick questions. One's about buses and the way forward for buses, and I realise you may not be able to answer this because of the position that you're in, but obviously people are really keen to know one thing about the timescale for a decision, and secondly about to what extent you think that we can go back to the model that we had before, given that with vaccinations will come back to something pretty like normal. My second lot of questions was about cycling and walking, and about obviously the current tranche of funding has been slow to get going because these are difficult things to start, but it is now starting to run forward. But I know it's oversubscribed and you've got a long pipeline. So are there plans to ask for more money? And thirdly, on green homes, obviously I know we're talking about that later, so you might want to leave that, Chair. But in looking at the report that we've got later from Mark Avedon and I'm really concerned about scale. I noticed in the annex to these papers there's stuff about Salford, but really this is a massive issue. It's going to require huge amounts of funding, a very skilled workforce, and I'm really concerned that the Green Homes grant itself has just been a disaster because of supply issues in the market, particularly for people who are looking at it privately, and we've tried to support a few residents through it and been completely unsuccessful. Thanks, and sorry to hog questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. They're very good questions. So on buses, the consultation ended at the end of January. So this was a further period of consultation, as I said, to look again at the changed market, if you like, for buses. You ask, can we go back to the model before? I think there's a couple of things to say about that. It's a very different world now because the buses are heavily subsidised. They're running, largely on public or government subsidy, and they're not running to the extent that they were. So there are fewer people travelling, but there are fewer buses services operating. I think it's going to be some time before the bus market recovers. I think there is potentially going to be some permanent change to the way people travel, and that might have an impact on all modes, tram, bus and train. So I think there's an expectation here that there will need to be subsidy in the bus market for some time to come, alongside a form of distancing. I think there was a reference made today by the Deputy Chief Medical Officer or one of the senior team that Certainly until the summer, there will be the same distancing requirements in place. So of course, that's going to have an impact. In terms of the timescale, well, I'm waiting to hear now from the TFGM in terms of the response to the consultation we've just had, and then the options for next steps. I do think Greater Manchester needs to make a decision. We've been debating buses for a long time, haven't we? And I think in some ways, the challenges may get even greater if we just don't do anything. But we'll be wanting to sort of respond to the consultation and move towards a decision. So it's hard to give you an exact timetable at this stage because the team are just looking at all of the responses. But I would hope that we would be able to, in the near future, move forward and take a decision on where we think we need to go as a city region. In terms of cycling and walking, I think there's a positive story there, Mandy, in that the government has allocated a lot of money to cycling infrastructure. And in the latest allocation, we got more than we bid for. I think we got 125% of what we bid for. And I think that's a reflection of the work we've all done, because we've got plans that are ready to go. And Chris Boardman is very fond of saying that we're one of, if not the largest capital project in the country at the moment. When you look at the B network in its entirety, it's a big undertaking. So I think we're in a really strong position when it comes to cycling and walking. There is a healthy pipeline. The figure that Chris and his team give is that at the end of 2021, we expect to have 50 new kilometres, or is it miles? I can't remember, one or the other, of segregated cycling provision. So they are expecting quite a big year on delivery with cycling and walking infrastructure. So that's really positive. The bike hire scheme is also moving to its final stages, the procurement, and we're hoping that by early summer there will be a new bike hire scheme available, certainly in the city centre and the areas around Oxford Road to begin with, but building out slowly across GM. So it's a really positive story, I think, the cycling and walking story. Just on the green homes, I agree with you. If we're to create the thousands of new jobs, we need to move quickly. And I think this is why I'm pointing towards the COP. The UK needs to put its best foot forward at the COP. And it needs to show to the rest of the world that there are investable propositions here, that people could come and help us with this drive to decarbonise our homes and our buildings, and small kind of initiatives with small funding I don't think quite rises to the challenge. But you're pointing to something else as well, which is the skills challenge that lies behind that, because you have to get the FE sector putting in place the number of places on courses for young people to be able to train in those retrofitting or those modern methods of construction skills, to then match the need to retrofit with the workforce that sits behind it. And there's a huge prize here, Mandy, this is the way I see it, which is, when in our lifetime have we been able to say to people in their sort of late teenage years or early 20s in the northwest of England that if they train in a particular skill set, they may end up having a good quality job for life? Because that's what it would mean, isn't it? If given that the UK is on this 2050 path, it's an amazing prize, really, and we've got to rise with urgency and with scale to this opportunity, because otherwise we'll end up importing the teams to come in and do this, and that would be a huge missed opportunity. So I am making this argument to the government. I think the COP is the time to sort of lay out ambitious plans of scale, but it's got to be largely based, I think, on training our own young people to take advantage of these opportunities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I invite Councillor Gibson, please? Apologies for overlooking you last time round. Apologies.
No problem, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you, Andy, for that.
Charles.
Hamilton Godwin beat me to it on cycling and walking, and so that was very helpful to hear that answer. My second, it's no problem. You asked it very well. My second question really was about the internal logic about being opposed to returning to a tier system, and also what the combined authority are doing about that. I'm not sure I have a fixed view myself about whether that's right or wrong, but I'm keen to know what the combined authority why they've come to that conclusion, and then what they're doing about it in terms of communicating with the government. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Charles. So a couple of things to say. If we look back to what happened before Christmas, I think the construct of the tiers as was, with non-essential retail allowed to open pretty much 24/7, I think wasn't the right approach, particularly in the pre-Christmas period, and it didn't stop the growth eventually of the virus coming through into Christmas and New Year. And I would say that with the new strains that we have around, and there are now a number of new strains which are more infectious, we are going to have to be careful. I think the other argument I would couple of other arguments to make about the tiers, which I think are widely shared by the leaders. When you have a fragmented picture in a particular region, where you've got shops and hospitality shut in one area, which eventually did happen, with tier 4, and then you've got hospitality open in a different region in Liverpool, as we had, you create an incentive for people to move around. And I don't think that helps, actually. If you look at Liverpool City Region's case rate through December into Christmas, they saw a very, very large spike in cases. And I do think that is linked to people travelling there to take advantage of the shops that were open and the hospitality that was open. So what that says to me is that there is a need for a more consistent approach. I don't know about you, but I found the whole thing of kind of stop and start and regular reviews and a patchwork of restrictions, it was confusing for the public, but it's also potentially divisive, where you have places open in one area and then shut very close by. I think we have to learn from all of that and adopt a more planned approach to the unlocking of business, where what we don't see is then people opening and then being told to shut again. More manageable, planned, and where possible, it being done on a national basis. So if we're going to start with schools on the 8th of March, I think then you could see how you might have a progressive opening of other sectors beyond that in a cautious way. And the vaccination programme, of course, the success of it would, I think, give us some confidence that approach could actually work. So that is the current feeling. I wouldn't want to say to you tonight that there's been a sort of firm view taken amongst the leaders. It was a sort of initial feeling from a discussion we had earlier this week. We are going to return to the matter at our we've called a special committee meeting on Tuesday to look at it again. So by all means feed in to your own your leader, and the debate goes on, if you like. It's not a fixed view, but I do think there is a sense of let's learn from what happened last year. It's why I just mentioned test and trace. It definitely is stronger than it was. The local input of districts and of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, who deserve a lot of credit, actually, they are finding a lot of cases that would otherwise be missed, has taken us to a point where we've got, as I say, just shy of 90% on index cases, and it was much lower than that before. But here's the point that I just think we all need to hopefully unite on. The weak link in the chain is support to self-isolate. So Dido Harding, I think, acknowledged this yesterday at the Science and Technology Committee. There are still far too many people who, even if we track them down, are saying that they won't self-isolate because they can't, because there isn't they're being turned down for the self-isolation support payment. Now, we've done some surveying of districts, and I think GM is consistent with what we're hearing around the rest of the country. There's a high refusal rate, and I think it's linked to the eligibility criteria. Sage have gone on record as saying that we need not just kind of decent wage cover for people, but you also have to protect the employment for people beyond the self-isolation period, because another reason why people aren't doing it is because they fear their job, they might get the wage cover from the government, but then there'll be no job to go to when the 2-week or the 10-day period is up. So good vaccination program has to sit alongside a robust test and trace system. But if our argument is, if that is there with self-isolation support, you can have confidence then about a rolling program of unlocking. So that's our thinking, Charles. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but you know, we're going to try and pitch it into the government with what success, I don't know, but we'll give it a go.
Thank you for that. Councillor Proctor and then Councillor August.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy, for the update. I mean, certainly 2021 is going to be another challenging year. We said this last year, but 2021 is going to be just as hard. It's just a quick comment on the impending homelessness situation. I think you're right when you say that the ending of the furlough and support schemes is going to really impact the economy. I think it is masking at the moment, and when that ends, you know, you're going to see a serious economic downturn, and we know that following an economic downturn there's always a rise in homelessness. And in addition to that, I think the lenders have been very sympathetic and sensitive to the situations that people have been in. I think that's going to diminish as that sort of support ends and we move back to normal. So that potentially can increase the level of homelessness. And I think, like you said, we're in a good position. All the initiatives that we've done, Bed Every Night and all the other schemes, puts us in a really strong position. But that's going to be put under extreme pressure. And I think the really important thing, as you mentioned before, is the prevention schemes. You know, if we put a lot of resources into them, that's going to help us to some extent reduce the levels of impending homelessness that's inevitably going to happen. But I think we're in a great position. But I think there's that serious threat in the distance coming. And we know economic downturns don't go quickly. It's going to be a long-term thing, so it's going to put a lot of pressure on us. So I just wanted to make that comment. But I think, you know, you are aware of the problems that are coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Kevin. I mean, I think you're absolutely right to highlight the scale of what might be waiting for us. I'm not sort of, you know, doing undue patting on the back of people by saying that we were in the best position we could have been, because there's a general feeling that because of the way the GM system has knitted together on this issue over the last couple of years, we were in a really strong place to face what came. And the stories of what has gone on over the last 12 months in some of the hotel accommodation that we've had, but also in our Bed Every Night shelters, there has been a phenomenal job done by lots of the voluntary community organisations, by the districts themselves, but also my team at the centre. I think we can have a lot of pride in what has been done. I don't think it's official yet, but there was a count last week of rough sleeping, and it was certainly in double figures. So, you know, the situation has been managed as best we can, although I think that's a reflection of the fact that some districts have had cold weather accommodation open over the last fortnight. But again, you know, it's people are working really, really hard on it, and I think I just want to recognise that. But the thing is, I think to be positive about it from a cross-party point of view, I noticed a change within the government on the issue over the course of the pandemic. And to be fair to the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, I think he is personally committed to doing something, and I hope he is, because he certainly seems so. And I think there's some simple learning coming out of Greater Manchester that people need to focus on, and it's that learning from that Housing First project. Why have we got 191 people accommodated with no evictions and with only a very small tenancy failure rate, or small, 10% tenancy failure rate? I think I know the answer to that question, and the answer is what Housing First does. It lifts people out of the sort of cliff edge approach that the benefit system sometimes puts in front of them. So, when people are given a situation and they've got like 2 months or something to find a job or whatever it might be, or to sustain the tenancy, it sets people up to fail, and it creates a stress and often a downward spiral that then, you know, puts them in a sort of revolving door situation when they're putting somewhere they fail, they're putting somewhere they fail. Housing First is telling us that if you lift people out of that and give them breathing space to recover, because they do need to recover if they've been sleeping rough, given, as you know, there's severe damage to their physical health and their mental health. What happens is they are able to use that breathing space and do use it to recover in a way that the normal use of the benefit system just doesn't allow that to happen. So for me, that is the lesson of what's coming out of here. And we apply a similar principle with a bed every night. You know, it's the same bed every night for a reason. Give people stability and don't put pressure on them, and they will begin to recover. And I'm very keen to take, you know, some of the learning from our Housing First pilot to the government and say, can we not implant these principles within the universal credit system? And actually, if people have been accepted as sleeping rough on the streets, you kind of got to lift them out of the rules and the regulations of benefits for a time and let people, recover. And I just think, you know, that's something where we have got a voice that needs to be listened to on this now, Greater Manchester, because of the work that we've been doing. And you know, I certainly think it's going to be a challenging year, but there are positives that we've established as a result of the work that we've done. But yeah, I don't underestimate the scale of what's coming at us.
Thank you.
It should be a model of what should be happening to the rest of the country, and you know, hopefully the government will pick that up as we hit these problems.
Absolutely, Kevin. I think there's an argument for universal basic income. I would argue, but that's a bigger argument for a different day. But kind of, sorry, Chad, but just to say, you know, spending money on covering the basics for people, housing, food. You know, there's a campaign now about the right to food, which if you give people the basics and basic security, you'll probably spend less funding of public money on crisis support for people in the mental health system or in the criminal justice system or in the drug and alcohol services. And I just think this, you know, the pandemic has shown that too many people don't have enough security to protect their health because they can't cover their income at work. Anyway, bigger issues, but I think it points in that direction.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor August, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Andy, for coming here today. Really interested in what you've had to say, and as a resident of Swinton, thank you for sorting out our train station. Very happy about that. I agree with you mainly on what you said in terms of not going back to this sort of patchwork tier system. But what I mainly wanted to talk to you about was homelessness, and I should have declared an interest. I work for Manchester City Council's outreach team working with bus sleepers. So I was the ones out last week at 4 AM doing that count, and the numbers are high. They are certainly well above where we hoped they'd be, and that was on top of us having over 300 referrals in for cold weather emergency accommodation at the moment. I couldn't do my job without a bed every night. You know, what that scheme has done and what you've done for homelessness has transformed things. But what my concern is at the moment is something that I raised last time in this meeting with Simon Notes, and that's for people with no recourse to public funds. I know the Mayor's fund pays for a small number of beds for no recourse, but it's in double digits. It's like 10 beds, I think. And we are seeing an increasing number of people with no recourse to public funds on our streets, and I am constantly going out to them and telling them there is nowhere for them to go. And it is one of the most heartbreaking things you can ever imagine to do. Apart from when it is too cold and we're worried they might freeze to death, they are out on the streets. And all I can do is refer them to somewhere where they can get a hot drink. But at night, I tell them where to get a sleeping bag and where might be dry. There are going to be more people with no recourse soon. The Brexit transition has meant that a lot of people, EU nationals, are no longer entitled to benefits if they haven't been here for a certain period of time, even if they have worked for a certain period of time. And soon people will find that their housing benefit stops. You know, it's been just over 5 weeks since that has happened, and soon we're going to have a tsunami of people with no recourse on our streets who can't go into a bed every night, who can't go into other accommodation. We can't get them private rented accommodation because they don't have the funds, because they're not entitled to those benefits anymore. They're on minimum wage. That's not a living wage, so they can't actually afford to pay the rent. And I am really, really worried that for single people with no children, where there isn't a statutory responsibility to support them, that we're going to have more people on our streets with nowhere to go, with nothing to do. And when I raised it with Simon last week, he said he wasn't sure what was in place for that. And I wondered if it's something that you had considered, and if it's something that we could look at wider, because I do think it's going to become more of a problem. There are already a huge number of people on the streets with no recourse. Most of the ones I counted were those no recourse people.
Right.
And now we're going to see more coming, and there's nowhere for them to go.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor August. Thank you, Charmaine. I mean, well, thank you for what you do, by the way. It's hugely appreciated. And I was listening carefully, because that's interesting to me. If if the no recourse to public funds population is obviously a growing number of people who are out there. I will get you the most up-to-date figures. I'll ask Kevin from my office to send them to you. I'm of the understanding that the Mayor's charity does fund more than 10 places. Now, I wouldn't want to get the figures wrong, but I can give you exactly what we do fund by the Mayor's charity. And I'm always, I mean, I would be always open to, it's independent of me, but I would always be open to asking them to do more to match the need, Sharmina. If you've got the evidence of that growing need, we would certainly want to see if we could provide a response that meets that need. More broadly, I think there is the need to raise the issue nationally with the government. This isn't a party political point, because actually this policy came in 1999, if I remember rightly. But can it be right in a country like ours to almost legitimise destitution in UK law? Because that's what it is doing, isn't it? It's saying that we're content with leaving people with nothing, and I'm not comfortable with that idea at all. So I kind of feel we need to mobilise a campaign on this issue. The government used that phrase "everyone in." And I thought it was such a powerful phrase to hear it coming from the government. A great thing to be kind of set as our goal. Absolutely, everyone in should be our goal. But of course, it's a statement that's inconsistent with no recourse to public funds, because it can't be achieved actually, because there are some people, if there wasn't a voluntary fund at a local level, you wouldn't be able to do it, and if you didn't have the goodwill of the faith organisations and others. So what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly this evening, is it's a bigger issue that's coming right at us because of the ending of the transition arrangements around Brexit, and a whole host of other reasons. So thank you for raising it. I will get the figures for you, and we'll get Kevin to send those on to you. But I will talk to City Mayor of Salford, obviously who leads on these matters for us, to see if we can work with other cities to have a renewed push, because obviously London and Birmingham and Liverpool will be absolutely in the same boat as us. So thank you for what you do, but also for the question you've raised tonight.
I know you want to come back, but it must be very brief, please, because there is another questioner and time is pressing.
It will be. Thank you. Yes, sorry. I think Molly's clarified it was 60 across GM, but it's 10 in Manchester. The other thing I wanted to quickly raise with you, and it is on the same point, so sorry, Chair, is that homelessness has also been criminalised by the government recently for anybody with no recourse or in an asylum process. If they've been found to be homeless, and this legislation came in December, they can be deported. Even if their asylum case is ongoing. So that's part of the problem at the moment, is that a lot of people are hiding and are they're not wanting to come forward. So I do think a national campaign to resolve this would be really welcome. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharmina. We'll take that on board. I think there's also a concern.
I'm concerned, Andy, that we are getting very close to the time you need to be away, and there is another question. So in fairness, can I invite Councillor Hayes, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks for that report, Andy. Some good stuff in there about stations in particular. So can you tell us what's the thinking behind GM taking over Horwich Parkway? What's the advantages, and is it going to be rolled out in other places, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayes. So this is obviously a long-standing ambition of Greater Manchester to take control of the stations, to make more use of them for community purposes or even commercial purposes. I think we underuse our stations across the city region, and often they can be quite uninviting, unattractive places with poor accessibility. In the case of Horwich Parkway, it's obviously a station that I think I'm right in saying that we built many years ago, but we didn't operate, but now we do under this new agreement with Network Rail. But if I look more broadly around the city region, and I go back to the Chair's question about town centre regeneration and town centre residential development, which I'd like to see more of to bring life into our towns, I think that if we had more ability to link development to the land held by Network Rail, or to build on or around that land on top of our train stations, we could also release funding to then improve those stations, improve their accessibility. It is a shameful statistic that about half of our train stations are not accessible to wheelchair users. And I think we shouldn't ever stop complaining about that, because how can it be justified in 2021 that so many of our fellow citizens cannot access the stations of Greater Manchester? So we did put the money in to sort out Swinton, but in some ways it's the tip of the iceberg, and there's such a bigger problem. So the vision I have, Martin, is that we make so much more use of our train stations. We knit them more into the community. We open up the planning opportunities around our train stations, and then the gain that we get from those developments goes back into the station to make them more attractive. And ultimately, we would want this to be a stepping stone towards more devolved control over the rail network more generally. The ability to have tram train or GM rail, as I've said, and this is not inconsistent with the government's policy. The government has said that they want to allow more devolved control of rail. So the Horwich, although small in one way, is quite significant and was seen as such by the rail industry. And I'm very keen that we show that a difference from taking control and then take that idea to maybe a flagship station in every borough, so that we can begin to show how we can manage these things better, and then integrate travel. The whole future for Greater Manchester has got to be not the modes of transport operating in their little silos with their tunnel vision, buses doing their thing, trams doing their thing. We have got to have a system where everything is connected and everything is integrated, and there's one vision for the whole thing. And I think when we control our train stations, it will take us a big step forward towards a London-style transport system, which I keep on talking about. So thank you for your question. I hope that answer makes sense.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much for attending this evening. We're just about at the time that you're due to leave us. So could I, on behalf of members, thank you for presentation and answering the questions this evening. I've got to say, I smile quietly to myself at the Horwich Parkway, having been the one who in 1995 initiated the first meeting with Network Rail, floating the idea of a station to support the stadium and the Middlebrook development. So I have an interest in that, when I smile inwardly when I think of the success of that particular rail station.
Well, congratulations, Chair. Things have come full circle for you with Greater Manchester taking control. So well done to you.
But thank you very much for your attendance this evening and the manner in which you presented.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to all the committee for the questions.
We move on then seamlessly to item 6, please, which is the Greens Home Grant local delivery. And this is Mark Atherton, I think, who is going to present. Papers being circulated.
Chair, thank you, and good evening, members. You'll recall that the last time I presented to you was before Christmas, and I was talking to you about public sector decarbonisation scheme and we were bidding for £80 million worth of government funding to deliver decarbonisation across the public estate, so public buildings. Although the money is not yet formally in the bank, I'm pleased to say that it looks very likely that we will get the full amount that we've requested from government, and we, subject to that final approval, we will be delivering that scheme over the next 12 months. At that meeting, you asked that I come back and present on the domestic agenda, and I've got a presentation for you this evening on Green Homes Grant. The overview is that government committed about £2 billion in the fiscal stimulus package that was released in the summer. 1.5 billion of this is going on the National Green Homes Grant Scheme, and 500 million is going on what's called local authority delivery. I'm hoping that Councillor Shilton-Godwin's poor experience of the Green Homes Grant Scheme is on the national scheme and not the local, but I'll find out later, no doubt. I know that the national scheme has experienced some difficulties, and we can talk about that a little bit more, but I am going to focus this evening on the local authority delivery scheme, of which, as I say, 500 million was available across all English regions. This funding was basically aimed at tackling fuel poverty, so there are some significant differences between the national scheme and the local authority delivery scheme. The key one being that they were asking local authorities to focus on alleviating fuel poor, but both schemes were hopefully going to support the introduction of clean growth programmes, support carbon and climate change mitigation, but also support green jobs, green resilience, and learn from other schemes to support future programmes on energy efficiency and heat. The scheme itself has been designed by BEIS in this measure. So in effect, each householder has to show that they can accept one of the primary measures given on this slide. And if they are able to accept one of the primary measures, they are then eligible for the secondary measures. So the key thing is that they can't ask for secondary measures on their own. I won't go through the list of it, but it's obviously important to note that the focus of the scheme is very much about heat, although importantly, BEIS did allow the introduction of solar photovoltaic in the later programmes. So it can be about energy generation as well, but there is very much a focus on heat. The eligibility criteria are that it only, for the local authority delivery scheme, it only applies to residents that have a household income of less than 30,000, and their energy performance certificate for their property is of the lowest order, so E, F or G. It is possible for us to fund Band D properties, but this has to be the exception rather than the rule. So we have to focus the programme on bands E, F and G, and if we can throw in a few Ds, then they'll accept that. Another big difference between the local authority delivery scheme and the national scheme is that owner-occupiers can receive the full cost of the measures up to £10,000, and social and private landlords can get 2/3 of the cost up to £5,000, which is significantly more attractive than the national scheme, where you have to have a contribution from the householder. So I think I mentioned to you last time we spoke that we bid for £4.7 million, GMCA bidding on behalf of the 10 local authorities, and we were successful in receiving this award before Christmas. We have promoted the scheme via direct mail, working directly through the local authorities, and I think members asked me to send around an example of the publicity material that we were using, and that was done. We're also backing that up with social media, and obviously there's an online website that we can direct people to. 4.7 million isn't a huge amount of money, but it will look at delivering something like 500 measures over the phase 1A programme. We're working with E.ON because they were already procured through the Oldham Warm Home Scheme, and they're already Trustmark registered contractors, which all registered providers need to be to deliver the Green Homes Grant Scheme. So over 4,000 letters and leaflets have been sent out, and as I mentioned, we've been concentrating on local news media and social media. So far, we've attracted 1,500 inquiries. Just less than 500 households have qualified for support so far. About 150 have not qualified, and the difference between those figures are still going through the process. This is the outcome from the project as the paper was written. So this is about 2 weeks old, and the figures as of today are significantly higher. A couple of things to point out. One is this is the process that applicants need to go through. So whilst we've generated quite a lot of leads and we've already got enough expressions of interest for pre-qualification to match the amount of funding available, we still have to go through an assessment, and obviously that gives rise to people cancelling at the last minute. Technical surveys also gives rise to people either not qualifying or cancelling at last minute for COVID reasons. So our installations are currently low, but that's to be expected at this phase in the programme, and they are likely to ramp up significantly over the next 2 months. The Local Authority 1A scheme has to be delivered largely by the end of March, and we are currently confident that we will deliver the scheme 1A in total. Also in the paper, at time of writing, I mentioned that we had bid for additional funds in the amount of 5.6 million under 1B. This, I'm pleased to say, has now been agreed, so we have received the additional 5.6 million. This will deliver a whole raft of additional measures, and as I mentioned, solar PV has come into the eligibility criteria within the phase 1B. We're also continuing to work through EON, the procured contractors, to deliver that scheme. So just to go through the summary, because I recognise this is complex, and it's the bidding processes that government are asking us to go through. We've secured 1A, and we're on with delivering that. We have just secured in the last week 1B, and that will run from March through to September. And we will be securing phase 2, which will run from approximately April through to December. So these are all the same scheme. We're having to bid into government for separate elements. The difference with phase 2 I will come on to in a moment, but basically it's being done through a regional award. So I'm pleased to say that the Northwest region has received an allocation of 52 million, and I believe Greater Manchester's share of that will be in the region of about 17 million. What this shows, therefore, is that from around November last year through to December in 2021, we'll have a programme of activity which, if taken all together, amounts to about £27 million. So the phase 2 scheme has not yet been formally agreed, but we know that, as I mentioned, it will go through the Northwest Energy Hub, and Greater Manchester's share should be sufficient to attract about another 1,500 properties, to add on to about the 1,000 properties that come from 1A and 1B, so probably about 2,500 properties over the lifetime of the scheme. The difference is that we're going to try a different procurement route. So we will still try and work through EON. However, the procured contractor is reaching the limit of our existing OG procured contract. So whilst we will continue to deliver through them, we're also working with the Northwest Energy Hub to deliver a dynamic purchasing system, which will be available to all Northwest local authorities. The benefit of this is that it will give access to the scheme to a significantly higher number of local suppliers. So we're very pleased about that, making sure that we're getting greater local economic value through the supply chain for the largest part of the scheme. If we just look at phase 2 alone, and we take an approximation of what the economic value would be, it accounts to something like an additional 425 jobs in the construction trade over phase 2. And if we were to add phase 2 together with 1A and 1B, it probably equates to something like 675 jobs. I've got to say, though, I'm less confident that for phase 1 and phase 1B, that they will be new jobs, because we are using existing contractors, and therefore there may be some upskilling of existing supply chain, but we anticipate the new jobs coming through phase 2. So I think that's the end of my presentation, Chair. The last point I will make is to try and answer Councillor Chilton Godwin's question around skills development. We have been working closely with the GMCA skills team to listen to the market and understand what the likely demand is likely to be, talking to local academic providers in the city region to understand what courses are already available, where the gaps may be, and we're intending to launch a programme specifically on green skills at the end of this financial year, so March, April time. I can't give you more details on that at the moment because it's still being developed, but the work has been quite inclusive, so we've done quite a lot of listening. We're into that phase of understanding what people have told us, putting forward proposals, and then putting a scheme that will start delivery in the new financial year, which coincides with phase 2 uptake of the LAD 1B scheme. Chair, I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Chilton Godwin, do you want to come back on that one quickly?
Well, thanks, but I wasn't first again. So.
No, it's all right. I noted your earlier comments. It's all right.
Okay, no, thanks for that, and thank you very much, Mark. And it is kind of as I expected, because basically you know that's all in the reporting, isn't it? And it's really good. It's really good work. But what really bothers me is that this whole stop-start approach to this whole topic means that what we're not getting is a proper market, a proper supply, proper ways of people being able to secure funds, whether or not they're low income or not. And we have a massive problem. And unless we manage to influence government to get a proper grip of this and to start to develop, and I do want to come to something specific on the skills thing, but a way for people to access funds, a skilled workforce, and real kind of hubs and ways of people of working together on this. We're just never ever going to catch up with this. Turn the tap on, turn the tap off. One scheme, another scheme, slightly different. People paid what you're paid. Frankly, to have to work through all those details, I just think is absolutely ridiculous and needs sorted out. On the skills thing. It isn't. I think. I mean, Andy earlier on talked about the massive level of opportunities for our young people, and perhaps young people who haven't already got a significant level of qualifications and are more practically minded, and that is fantastic. And I think that is really good. But actually, they will be employed by small businesses, and actually, we also need a way of upskilling builders that already exist, businesses that already exist. To understand, actually refitting homes and retrofitting is not straightforward. It's a pretty complicated topic. If you don't do it properly, you can introduce all kinds of health hazards into people's homes, damp and the like. It's not something to be done by cowboys. It's something to be done by skilled, knowledgeable people who understand our local housing stock and how it might work. Sorry, I've gone on too long. I'll shut up now. Thanks very much.
Thank you. You want to respond to that, or
well, I'll respond very briefly, because
if you would, please.
I agree with the councillor. I think she's exactly right. What we need is a firm commitment from government for a long-term scheme to give confidence to our businesses to invest in upskilling. And I made this point directly to one of the Bays ministers last Friday. To be fair to the Bays minister, he knows that the challenge he has is with Treasury. And so they are. It's Treasury that we need to convince on this. It's not the technical people, because they fully understand it. Treasury, obviously, well, it's not for me to talk about Treasury. Treasury, I think, are nervous about how much COVID is going to cost, and therefore they are trying to make sure that they're only putting a certain amount of funding out at each time. I understand where they are, but we still need a long-term scheme. So I fully agree with Council. I also made the point that she's eloquently made, that actually local authorities are the best place to bring all of this together. We have access to the supply chain through the growth company, and the growth company are working with our supply chain to get them accredited so that they could bid into this scheme. As I mentioned, they have to be Trustmark accredited, which is a quality assurance mark, and that drives the idea of improved quality of staff to make sure that they're going to deliver improved and resilient work. We also have access and opportunity to link together the supply chain with the skills and higher education providers, and we have the ability to be in touch with residents to generate the demand. So I have made the case that we need a long-term scheme, and that local authorities, I believe, are the best place to deliver that scheme. I wish that government had put 1.5 billion into local authorities rather than develop a national scheme, but that's not the way they decided to go.
Thank you. I've got a number of speakers, so could I ask you please to be brief and questions or comments accordingly. Councillor August and then Councillor Walker.
Yes, I shall be brief, Chair. My question is about the cap on the gross household income of £30,000. By my calculations, 2 people on minimum wage would not qualify for that cap, as they working full time, they'd be at £34,000. Add in a few children, and those people are probably on the poverty line. My question really is, have you considered doing a couples, more than one person cap and a singles cap? Because I think somebody on £29,000 on a single wage in a property on their own is possibly getting more out of this scheme than a couple on minimum wage with some kids. I'll leave, you get the idea. I'll leave it like that to keep it brief.
I do, and equally to keep brief, I agree with you again. However, it's national criteria, not locally set. So we are hamstrung by the eligibility criteria that have been set by government.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, fairly simple ones, hopefully. One, there was a BBC radio programme about the national grants. And the fact that actually almost nobody is getting any money through, and loads of contractors who'd set up and learned the skills for this type of work were likely to go out of business because they'd found the people who wanted it. They were all geared up, but they hadn't got any money through, and it just set a scene for me of, and in fact I'd got a contractor at my house, a very good professional contractor, and I asked him about the scheme and he said, not on your life. He said, there's no way I'm going down the route of that because it's such a mess, and we've seemed to have set a scene so that the good contractors, he's part of the Wigan Good Contractor Scheme, but he's definitely been frightened off it, and many others clearly have if they can't get the money through. So that's the second one. Is simpler, but it might be how long's a piece of string. But if you took a sort of typical 3-bedroomed house, how much roughly would an air source heat pump cost? Because 10,000 quid, I've got a feeling, doesn't leave much left.
Yes, thank you. There's 2 questions in there. I mean, I've only really seen the same press as you have about the national scheme. So my understanding is that the government has contracted with an American company to administer the scheme, and that the time differential and other reasons have meant that a lot of the supply chain that are bidding into these types of programs have not been paid on time, or have had interesting feedback from the company, which has delayed and caused problems for individual residents. I am a little concerned that because the national scheme and the local authority scheme are called the same thing, we might get tarred with the same brush. Therefore, we are relying on working with districts and indeed local communities to ensure that the local authority delivery scheme is not mired with the same issue. On your second point around costs, you'll have seen from the presentation that there are a number of different primary measures that people can go to. It doesn't have to be air source heat pumps. There are a relatively small number of heat pumps, and they tend to be in those properties that are most appropriate for the heat pump. So it tends to be those that have very old heating systems, and particularly those that are already on electric heating systems rather than gas. You don't have to have an air source heat pump, you just have to have one of the primary measures. We are, and I think this is national rather than Greater Manchester, seeing the cost of heat pumps come down. And one of the challenges is that to really bring the cost of heat pumps down, we need to rapidly increase the number that are being ordered. So the only way to drive down cost is to increase the scale of uptake. Now, if I told you that some of the conversations we're having with contractors can get the price of an air source heat pump down to approximately the same amount as a new gas boiler, it would perhaps resolve some of your concern. But to get there, we need to stimulate the market. So what government is trying to do is stimulate the market. And again, to put that into context, there are roughly around 40,000, maybe 50,000 heat pumps in the UK that are installed each year. And what this scheme is set to do is trying to ramp it up to 600,000. So it is trying to rapidly increase the uptake to drive down the cost.
Thank you.
Councillor Hayes, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. I think you're asking at the end for if we have any suggestions for how to promote the scheme. I must admit, I can't think of any. So my question is there a role for the district here in the sense that they may have some expertise in promoting this scheme? And obviously it would be in their interest because of benefit to the housing stock and employment. So is there a role for the districts, please?
Chair, I'm sorry if that didn't come through in the presentation. This is being delivered by the districts. We are working hand in glove with the districts. It's Greater Manchester is just helping to coordinate and make sure the money comes in and it gets spent in the right way. The delivery is going through district officers. I think what I was, so it's the districts that are deciding where the mail shots are going, how the social media is being delivered within their district. It's all going with individual local authority brand, not GMCA brand. I should have seen from the example, the one I put on the screen was branded as Salford. It's the same for each district. The reason for asking the question was I'm very conscious that councillors around this table are intimately linked with their constituents. And if you take on board what we're currently doing, my question to you is, are we missing a trick? Is there another route into your constituents, particularly those that are fuel poor or those that are most likely to be eligible to be eligible for the scheme? Is there another way that we can work with you through your districts to get to the people that we really need to get to? Because whilst we've got enough people lined up for 1A and probably 1B, we've got a substantial amount to do in phase 2, and we really need to rethink how we get to those people. So I would take any advice that councillors have to give.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thanks a lot.
There are no further questions noted. So I think we're asked to do two things. One is to pick up on the point you've just made, Mark, about informing and getting the message out. The first thing we're asked to do is somewhat easier, that's to note the paper and the presentation, which we thank you. Perhaps in terms of advice on how we could promote the scheme individually, collectively, that's something we could respond by email to Mark or through officers. And the widespread wisdom around the table, I'm sure, will be received appropriately. So, members agree to that option? And can I therefore thank Mark for the presentation and further updates, please, as the programme rolls out over the next 9 or 10 months will be helpful.
Very well. Thank you, Chair. Bye, everybody.
We move on then to item 7, the bio-waste management strategy. And we have Paul Morgan with us on this paper.
You do. Good evening, Chair.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Members will remember that I presented an update on the National Resources and Waste Strategy just a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully some of this will be fresh in your minds. In that update, I touched on the need to think about how bio-waste, that's the mixed garden and food waste that's collected across the 9 districts of Greater Manchester, is collected. The National Waste Strategy seems to want to mandate the weekly separate collection of food waste, as it is believed that this will actually capture more material. And there's a consultation on this and a range of other subjects due out in the spring, and we'll develop our responses accordingly to the questions asked. This report presented tonight summarises the implications of the Waste Strategy's proposals on the cost of collecting this material, the consequences on the Greater Manchester Combined Authority's facilities for bulking up the materials, and then the contracts for treating it, and then finally proposes a strategy to take this forward so we can address it for future years. Currently, bio-waste is delivered to our network of transfer stations by your refuse collection crews, whereupon it is then hauled to a number of treatment facilities across the northwest and also into the northeast. The contracts with the facilities are managed by Suez, our main contractor, and they themselves control about half of that tonnage and send it to their contractor. The remaining tonnage are outlets directly contracted with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and all of these contracts expire in 2022 and a couple of years off. If we are directed to collect food waste separately from garden waste and on a weekly basis, it will come at a cost. The collection impacts are have been determined by some work we've had commissioned to do some modelling. In brief, compared to what we do now, this option would result in a significant increase in collection vehicles across the conurbation with their associated collection crews, and resulting in a 36% increase in costs. Looking at the treatment side of things, we looked at the likely available technologies to us. In-vessel composting, it's a system we use at the moment for treating the mixed bio-waste. Wet anaerobic digestion, that's effectively the food waste element that generates a digestate at the end of the process, as well as harnessing gas for electricity generation. And dry anaerobic digestion, which will look at producing a dry compost-like output as well as harnessing gas. And dry anaerobic digestion can deal with both mixed organics, both food and garden waste. In terms of cost, not unsurprisingly, what we do now is the cheapest option. But if we developed dry anaerobic digestion facilities, it's been modelled to cost us a further 6%. And we could continue then to mix the bio waste for collection, but that perhaps wouldn't be strategy compliant. But if we had wet anaerobic digestion, that's another significant cost as well. However, not quite as much as dry, because we can treat the garden waste through open windrow composting, which does reduce those costs slightly. However, none of these savings, if generated through treatments, do in fact offset the increased cost of collection for separate materials. In terms of carbon savings, though, dry anaerobic digestion treating the mixed organics provides the greatest benefit, because it actually gathers the gas off more material than wet anaerobic digestion. But wet anaerobic digestion itself does perform better than in-vessel composting, which doesn't gather any of the gas for electricity. And a word on costs. Although we've said that costs are likely to go up significantly, the government has committed to underwrite any increase in expenditure through its new burdens budgets. But any change of collection from now will greatly impact the householders across the conurbation, as they'll have no doubt a greater number of receptacles to collect, to present for collection, and there'll be an increase in number of vehicles on the road. So finally, what are we planning as a service to do about it? The Waste Strategy wants to see the changes from 2023, and we've spoken to DEFRA and they are comfortable with, across the country, not just in Manchester, having a sort of 8-year transition period from then, so that contracts can play out and new facilities can be built. So we have decisions to make, and these need to be underpinned by robust analysis. To that end, we are proposing to develop a bio-waste strategy that looks at a range of options. For example, do we want, or can we develop our own infrastructure so that we can ensure we have a resilient and secure outlet and capacity, especially as capacity across the northwest is very limited for treating this material? And if we do develop our own facilities, on what basis do we do it? Do we build and operate, or do we ask the market to build them and operate them for us? These are the kind of things we'll be looking into. To buy time to make sure we get our strategy right, and to ensure the continued treatment of current waste stream, we do consider our need to consider our current contracts. As I said, they expire in 2022, but we're let under a framework agreement which itself expires a year later in 23. We've obtained advice on our options, and we will be seeking for the combined authorities' approval at the meeting in a week or so to commence the re-procurement of all of our biowaste contracts so that they run from 2022 to 2026. But we intend to start the procurement as soon as possible, and perhaps so we've let the contracts well in advance of when we need them to ensure that we have secured that capacity for that stopgap period. This is not a request for additional money. The budget for biowaste treatment has been set in current budgets and is in the medium-term financial plan. So all things being equal, we'll have covered these costs off. So we're just asking for approval to commence this procurement. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for that. An interesting area. Any questions from members? I remember, I was waiting for the members to come in. I remember some best part of 40 years ago now, there was a firm at Radcliffe, Standard Engineering, I think they were called, who produced a dry machine that used to mix all materials, waste materials, and produce a dry compost from it. It's effectively like a large spin dryer. The drum turned for about 24 hours, so mixing all this stuff together, including glass and the like. That never seemed to take off, but it seemed to be at the time an effective way of dealing with a whole range of putrescent and non-putrescent waste.
It sounds very similar to the process that used to operate in a lot of the Manchester facilities. They had facilities. They had Dano drums, which were effectively large rotating sieves. I think what put the mockers on that scheme was the advent of plastic, because if you think things like glass, they're inert and can be used as a subsoil, and obviously the organics as well can make form soil, but plastics and things that last a long time start to contaminate the material and can't be used.
Thank you for that. That's bought some time for Councillor Walker to come in with a question, please.
Yeah, I'm scraping the barrel, but it is an important subject. And although I've read the report, I'm trying to understand, because I know that politically on the doorstep, when we first went away from weekly collection, people were, got very upset about it. But nowadays, people are very comfortable with the way it works. And I just wonder, scientifically, is there a great, a great gain to be changing to what's suggested here?
In terms of the food waste, it's only the food waste that we're looking to, or the government is seeking to move to weekly. The government's, well, through the organisation called the Waste and Resources Action Programme, they have undertaken waste analysis that suggests that weekly food waste captures more, weekly food waste collections captures more of the material. There are potential flaws in that analysis, and it's not quite as clear, we don't think, as what that organisation suggests it is. So it's purely about trying to capture more material. However, on the other side of that, you could invest more perhaps in promotional and communication scheme and encourage more material going out rather than having the cost of an additional collection. So it's a bit of a balance, and one that we will certainly consider in our consultation responses.
Right, and now I just want to be clear. As I say, politically, it's very easy to say, we want a weekly collection, but in reality, it doesn't. I've never get asked it anymore. It's not an issue anymore. People are comfortable. They've got used to it. Change is always a downer, but once you've done it and people have got used. But I suppose in the middle of summer, sometimes it can get a bit smelly when you open the lid.
Yes, and then that's one of the good things about mixing food waste with garden waste, to kind of provides a bit of dilution as well.
Yes, no, and I appreciate. I mean, I'm a bit of an idiot about this separation, so I spend loads of time getting everything into the right bin and double checking that we can recycle that. But it just feels frustrating, and the danger is the more complicated it gets, the less likely people are to do it.
Yeah.
So they're not all going to be like me, spending, you know, half an hour with it and rooting in the bin, and I've got a long-handled catcher that I can root to the bottom of the bin if I accidentally tip a bit of something in. So I just wanted a bit of clarity on that, but it does sound like education might be a far better value for money, and realistically, I'm sure we could up that capture quality, as you put it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I have no further indication from members, so we're asked to note the contents of the report, having made comments thereon, and await further reports in due course as matters progress, please, Paul.
Yeah, no problem at all, Chairman. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your attendance
Pleasure.
on that one. It comes then to item 8, which is the work programme. There is a paper on this which Joanne has circulated. It is largely historic, but we have a number of items for future meetings. I think it covers all the points raised by members generally. If there are specific points that members want to raise at future meetings, could we please inform Joanne and colleagues? I'm taking silence as acquiescence to that report at the moment. Item 9, items for information, and we have got the Green City Region briefing, which was attached as an annex, and there is a long question from Councillor Chilton Godwin, who's had to leave the meeting. Could I ask Joanne, please, can we take that up and provide a response, feed it through the system and provide a response to members?
Yes, Chair, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 10, register of key decisions. They have been notified in the usual manner, and they are there for noting, unless members have anything to raise specifically. And the final item, therefore, to note is the date of the next meeting, which is Thursday, 11th of March, again at 6 p.m. And in the current climate, again, will be a virtual meeting, as has been this one. That, therefore, being the whole of the business, can I thank you for your attendance and declare this meeting closed?
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you,
I'll end the
Chair.
meeting now.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.
Good night.